Everyone, thank you for being here. Today we're going to talk about why taking notes while you read is actually really important, not just for keeping a record of what you're reading, but actually it helps you in other categories as well. And I want to share that with you and want to know if anybody else does it. And I have seen that quite a few authors that I enjoy do this as well, and I didn't know that when I first started doing it, so it was really nice for me to see. Ryan Holiday is one of them. If you've ever seen his videos that talk about how he writes his books, he actually does a similar thing. But what I do is pretty simple and doesn't require a lot of effort. At least after the fact it won't feel like a lot of effort, but during you might feel like it is. I just get a notebook that has no lines on it because I don't like writing with lines. It makes me feel restricted and like I don't have any freedom. So I'm sure there's a lot to look into there. But basically what I do is I will write the title and then I will write the author name underneath, and then I will just write the quotes, the verbatim from the book, and then write the page number. I know a lot of people will do annotated note taking. I don't really have that style. I don't like highlighting in books or writing in books. To me, it feels disrespectful to the book itself and to the author and what they wanted the book to mean. I do understand that when you buy a book, it is yours and that it is your interpretation of the book. That is what you're doing with it. So completely get it. It is just not my chosen way of going about it, but it does help me center on the fact that I am spending time on this book and that I am reading it. And over time, it is not something that I always do with every book that I read, because there just isn't something that really stands out throughout the entire book. And you might be surprised, like, what? It's 200 pages, nothing stood out. And sometimes there's nothing that stands out, and sometimes things stand out 15 times over a span of 3 pages. So it really depends, and it really does reflect to me, like, my mood does affect when I'm reading, because I will see things differently, and it is also just a good way to keep track of all the books that I've read, because in the back I will write the book and then the date that I finished it. So I don't know exactly the days that I started them, but usually I can interpret that it was a day or two after I read the last book. So that means I do have a lot of books, and I actually did the other day just count how many books I have and how many I read, and it was about 28% of the books that I have I've actually read, which I thought was like the amount. I thought it was like 25-26%, and I was pretty close. So there's about 400 books that I have, and so just under 100 or over 100 I've read, and yeah, so not all the books that I've read are even in my library, because if they're really good, I'll usually give them away. So to me, that means I need to get a lot more books, but probably not for a while. I did just buy the entire Paulo Coelho collection. But what you're here for is, why did this change my life? I started doing this in August of 2020 when I first realized that I needed a change in my life. I needed to do something drastic, and I needed to have a redo button. And as I've been reflecting over these past few days, I have realized that I've gone through the same transformation in the same time period 4 years later, which is right now. So yeah, we're in the same thing again, and having this habit is just a really nice thing for me. And because I was reading so many books at the time, I realized that I actually have to pay attention to what I'm reading and why. And the thing is, when you are choosing to read a book a week, that is only 7 days to read maybe 200 or 300 pages. And I had other things to do. I wasn't just sitting there reading all day. So the books that I was choosing had to actually catch my interest and provide some kind of value. And that is really the first two things that I had to get out of my system, was reading just what everyone else was reading and reading things just for the sake of it. I had to have a reason why I was reading the book, and I had to be interested in it. There was some books that took me multiple weeks to read, and there's only one book that I can remember me willing to dedicate that time to. Actually a few. Columbine, the book about the first mass shooting that happened in America was one of them, and then Letting Go by David R. Hawkins was also another one, just because both of them had such deep narratives and stories and work that they were talking about that it just took me time to process it as I was reading it, which is really another thing that the writing down of the notes and quotes from the books is doing for you, is you are processing in real time what you're reading, because for you to stop and to physically write out what the author is telling you, you're being able to process it again, and you're processing it with the understanding of what you have just read over that time period that you're reading right now, and also what you've read before. And it brings up thoughts for me of other books that I've read, and it gives me a snapshot of like, what is going to come up next, and is it going to relate to this quote, is it going to be completely different? And oftentimes if I do go back and read what I've written from these books, I can see a theme coming up, and a lot of the times it reflects what I was going through at the time. So not only is it just me getting something out of the books, it's me getting another view of how I'm living life and like what I'm going through. So there's a multi-level layer of processing that happens with that, and it's also a good reference point for me to see. There's some books that I have 10 pages of quotes from, and then there's some books that I have one quote and then I didn't even finish the book because I just could not commit to doing it. And that's really what is happening, is that I had to decide in the moment, is this something that I'm going to continue to commit my time to? And that is something that varies. If it is a book that catches my attention today, it might not be something that catches it in 2 months from now, and that is really subjective too. So it's this kind of dance that I'm constantly doing with these books, and do I feel pulled to reading them? And there are a few books that I've reread, and it is always this connection that I feel that I want to read this book at this time, which might sound weird, like the book is telling you to read it. And that's usually how I did it, is I would finish a book and I'd give myself a day or a few hours and just let what I read process through, or not think about it, put it down. And once I would put the name of the book and the date in the back of the book, it was usually a finality for me, like this chapter of this book in my life is over and I'm moving on. So that was really important for me to have that like definitive, we're moving on. And it really does reflect to you kind of like how life goes, because there are certain times where you feel like you need to close a chapter, and yet it's hard to do because you keep going back and thinking about it. And I know that reading a book isn't necessarily the same thing all the time, especially if it's nonfiction and it's just kind of telling you how to think. But if you've ever read a nonfiction book or a fiction book that has captured you and the story, you might be going back to it. But once I put that this was the day I finished it, it's the day that I get to close out that part in my life. And though it is harder to do that in real life with relationships and people and situations and events and experiences, it kind of does help to put a date to, okay, this person is no longer in my life on this day, and I have to go back to that being the truth of, I have to let this go and keep moving on. So it was a way for me to kind of stretch and grow that muscle of being able to put something down and say, I'm done with it. I got what I needed out of it. I may someday go back and read this book, but I will not be the same person reading it, and I will pull out different information then. And it is something that has been proven true. I have gone back and reread certain books and written notes both times, and I've done it with my favorite book, The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde, and I'll someday do a video about that specifically. But it showed to me that I got something different out of this book every time I've read it, and I've read it every year pretty much since I was 17, so almost 10 years now, which feels crazy. I've gotten something else out of this book and something different, and sometimes I look at the quotes and I'm like, was this even the same book? It's completely different things. And sometimes I'll pull out the same exact sentence, and that's really cool too, to realize that this thing struck past the place I was in and went deeper into the core, which is not something that happens often, but is very welcomed when it does. So that was really an important thing. It showed me that I didn't necessarily always want to spend my time reading certain books because I had to read it within a week or in a week and a half or 2 weeks, and you're not going to be able to do that if you don't like the book. So you're much quicker to put something down and say, you know what, this really didn't work for me, and I am going to move on. And another really cool thing that comes along with it is that over the past 4 years, I have a physical space being taken up by the books that I've read instead of it being the actual 150 books. It's something that takes up space, but I can move around and carry it in, one hand and have a record of it and the parts of it that I enjoyed, which is why annotating was difficult for me, because you still have to keep the copy of the book. At least from what I understood about annotating, I might be wrong, but because I like giving the books away to people as well, I want them to have a fresh experience with it and not be tainted or colored by the experience that I had with the book, by the highlighting that I might have done. So that's why I want to write it in this quote book, and then it turns into something that you can also share with people. If they ask you, well, what did you like about the books, you have literal proof of what you liked and what it meant to you. So it's just an interesting way to go about it. I'm currently on my 6th notebook of doing it. I have like 4 pages left in this one, so that'll be exciting to finish this one up. And it just kind of goes to show that the things that you dedicate your time to, you will continue to do, and that it's something that a habit that I just picked up. And the first 2 years, it took a while to continue to do it, and now every time I carry a book with me, I have to carry this notebook, but it doesn't take too much more space up, and people don't judge you as much as you think you do. And if you can carry the book around, you can carry the notebook. And if you like to read on your phone or on a tablet or something like that, you can continue to do that too, or you can type it out, or I don't know if you can copy and paste quotes out of ebooks. I don't know if you can do that, but that might be an interesting way to go about it as well. Just having a record of what you went through and how you got through these books is really fascinating, and yet it's not something that I go through very often. Sometimes I'll just pick them up and look through them and maybe stop on a quote here or there, but it's not usually something that I really go back to. And that was probably the biggest thing, that it is delayed gratification, right? Reading a book, that's all reading a book is you're going through this process of understanding and creating, and that you are having an emotional connection to this book. But it takes time to read a book. It takes 6-7 hours to read a book, depending on the size. It could take 15 hours, or how much it's taking from you, it could take even more. So it's something that you really have to sit with and to decide to dedicate your time to, and that the journey of going through it is the thing that is the most important. And that is what I've really learned, is that the delayed gratification isn't so that I could look through and have, oh, look at all these notes, but the journey in and of itself of being like, oh, wow, I'm still able to connect to books and want to write things down, and that I have this ability to decide I want to spend my time here and I don't want to spend it here. And I usually won't go for like the mainstream books anymore, just because it doesn't interest me, and maybe if I read it, it would, but because I've changed my relationship with reading to have so much value to me, I want to have better experiences with the books and to get something out of it, and to be able to share that with myself and with other people about what I got out of it. So fiction isn't usually something that I gravitate towards. It'll be some kind of nonfiction, and if it is fiction, it's probably authors that I've loved my whole life, that I'll go back to, or look at the classics. And that's great, and it's also not, because I don't get to really get into the stuff that a lot of people are getting into, but it really goes to show that your life is your own experience, and even though everybody else is doing something, it doesn't mean you have to, or that you'll even find enjoyment in it. So it really has given me this space to evaluate the experiences, and am I going to actually dedicate my time to a book that I really can't get past the first few pages? It's just taking forever, because there's books that I will pick up and I will finish that day or the next morning, because drew me in so quickly. And that's kind of how I want to look at life now. It's the experiences, and am I getting out of this what I want to? And you won't know until you pick up the book and you start, but then you get to evaluate, is this a book that I want to finish? Is this a book that I actually want to put down at the end of this and be happy that I spent my time on it? Because it takes 10 hours to read this book. Is this where I want to spend my time? And that is also a good line of questioning to ask when you're around certain people. Is this the experience that I want to have? Is this bringing me joy? And am I getting something out of this? And we have to be getting something out of everything we're doing. Otherwise, what are we doing it for? If we're not growing, if we're not getting better through all of the things that we're doing, it doesn't really matter that we're doing it. We're just being the same person or worse off for it. And if it's not progressing you in this right direction, it is holding you back because you could have spent that time somewhere else. And this doesn't mean you have to now calculate every single thing and make sure it reaches all these metrics. It's just another way or another filter for you to look at life and be like, is this actually what I want? And if you're in an experience where you're like, I did not like that, give yourself the space to be like, why didn't I like it? And to be okay with that decision, to say, you know what, I don't want to do this. And also writing these notes down has taught me that I can keep promises to myself, that this was something I started in August of 2020, and now it's almost 4 years later, and it's something that I still want to do. And that's not true for necessarily all of the other things that I picked up around that time to help me. I do still continue to write all the time, and I do walk, but there is certain things that just come and go, and that you become okay with it because you've found places where you actually want to spend your time. And if you're interested in reading more books, why is that? Why do you want to do this, and what are you getting out of it? These are the questions I had to ask myself. I liked reading books, and I always had books around, and my library 4 years ago was like 5 books, and now it's grown to 400 or so. But because I found the love for it, or I rekindled that love from when I was a kid, and we would get like stickers or whatever prizes if we read a certain amount of books and found the vocabulary words or whatever. So you'd have to read more books to get more vocabulary words, and that was what I was looking for when I was going through them. But it was a reward system, but there was also an enjoyment there. I fell in love with reading when I was a little kid, and this is something that I still continue to do. So if it's not reading that you are super into, what is it that you're into? Did you enjoy drawing or coloring or creating crafts? Was it the friendship bracelets? What was it? Did you enjoy going outside and playing football or playing baseball, basketball? What was it that you enjoyed? And there's plenty of things that you probably did. So go back to it. Is there enjoyment that you can still find there? And how can you incorporate that more into your life? And though reading is now a more structured thing in my life, it's still something that I find enjoyment in. And I'm always gravitating towards the next book, which is really exciting to be living in a world where there's so much accessible entertainment and so easily available, and we get to choose which ones we want to spend our time on and where we want to spend our life on. I want to spend it growing and sharing and becoming better for it, and finding value in the people who have decided to write down their story or their interpretation of the world. And that is what excites me and why I want to record it as I do it. So have you ever been taking notes when you read? Is there something that you enjoy that other people think is kind of weird? And they're like, okay, that's usually the reaction that I get. They're like, oh, you take notes while you read? That's a decision you can make. And it doesn't bother me anymore because I think it's funny. I'm like, this is what I do. And you can think it's weird, you can think it's super cool and the greatest thing ever, or you can think nothing of it, and it doesn't change the fact that I enjoy doing it and having this record. And you would think that being able to look back at all the books that I've read is something that I like doing, and that's the goal of it, but it's actually just the journey of it, and sitting with the book and being like, wow, like I got something out of it, and this moved me so much that I wanted to take my own time and physically write it out. Not only am I spending time with this book and choosing to be there with it, but I am choosing to go further and to write out word for word what this person said because it meant so much to me. And that is usually how I spend my life, is deriving so much meaning out of everything. And that's really the way that you can go about life, is you can derive meaning from everything you do, or you can choose to see that there's meaning in nothing. It's up to you to decide what it is that any of this means, or that it means so much. Everything can be a miracle or nothing, and it's up to you however you want to see it. So writing these quotes means that I get to spend more time with something that I enjoy, and I just do it. I have liked doing it. I will probably continue to do so. I tried to read a book a week. I actually just looked. I've read 18 books this year, which is about 10 books behind a book a week goal. So that may not be something that super happens this year. I was gonna say it's been a crazy year, so like great that I read even that many, but every year is a crazy year in its own right and in its own regard. So don't use that as an excuse. And if you have some kind of crazy goal, like a book a week, and you don't achieve it, it's okay. You will get through it. And as long as you just keep going back to it and getting back to center and being like, this is why I want to do it, and have that be the reason why you go back to it, and not some goal that you can offhandedly tell someone who's going to be like, yeah, okay. And they're not going to really care. So make sure that your goals are for you, and that you're doing it because you want to learn more and you want to grow, and not because you want to have something that you can tell somebody who isn't going to care. And most people don't. Even the people who love you the most are still going to be like, wow, that's a thing that you said. And that's fine. Nobody has to be super excited about what you do except for you. So I hope that you're finding things that excite you and that you want to do, and that you're keeping a record of it. Our life is going to flash by, and someday you might want to look back and see, wow, I've recorded the life that I've lived. And you still won't be able to record every moment, but at least you'll have a touchstone of the reality that you lived in 2020, in 2021, in 2030 from now. So that is why I do it, and it's something cool to keep around. And I have all of my writing displayed now up in my office. So it's just a place where I finally accepted that this is who I am, that I want to read books, and I want to write, and I want to share, and that acceptance is really important. And funny enough, that writing down quotes from a book and the page numbers got me there, but it is something that I've dedicated my time to and have created a relationship with, and one that I continue to nurture, and that I can do anywhere. I can be on a beach reading a book, or I can be in a plane reading a book, or I can be in my bed or on my couch, and I can still be doing the same thing. And it's a cool, versatile thing that is exciting, and hopefully you pick up the habit, or you have done something like that, and you can share that below. But I really do appreciate you being here and listening to the rants of somebody who loves books and who shares that love story in these really cute, funny notebooks that I found at Michael's. And I think they're all sketchbooks, and I'm just like, nope, they are my journals for my books. So I hope you have an amazing week, and we'll talk soon. Bye.